Good morning. I'm Dimitri Papadimitriou. I'm a distinguished senior fellow and president emeritus of MPI, and I'm serving my president here for the last couple of years. It is a pleasure to be doing this. It is a pleasure to see so many people with whom we have done so many things over the years, and we appreciate this. Nice to see you all here. I'm going to have to read a whole bunch of announcements. I'm not very good at reading, which probably tells you something. But anyway, I'd like to not only welcome you, the in-person people, but also the online viewers, because we're live streaming the event. If you wish either of the two audiences to check out the report, you can find it at bit.ly.com /MPI untapped talent, all one word. Now you know I have to read these things. You can tweet your questions to @migrationpolicy, or you can use the hashtag MPI discuss, or you can email events@migrationpolicy.org. I think I read all of my instructions, and Lisa will be pleased. So we have a terrific report here. It is a series of reports that Jeanne and Michael have done on this issue, but this time they have gone several steps further in trying to quantify both the costs and the loss in revenue, taxes, etc., as a result of the underemployment of people with college degrees or above. And I wanted to make a couple of remarks because this is Washington, of course. Washington is, as you all know, or at least maybe not as much as it used to be, a cow town in the sense that we only talk about issues and like issues that involve us. But there is a world out there, and that world is seized by the same issue. This is not something that just happens in Washington. We do not waste brains. Maybe we waste brains at a significant degree. I'm not quite sure that we waste brains to as high a degree as some other countries do, including some countries that have much more selective immigration than we do. It's a different way of wasting human capital, but nonetheless, a waste of human capital is a waste of human capital. And I'd like to make two comments before I introduce our guests here, as well as Michael and Jeanne. And the first one is a simple. You may have heard me do that in other settings, but for me, for us, I think at the Migration Policy Institute, we are convinced that human capital is either the essence, if you will, the secret ingredient of personal success, economic growth, and competitiveness, as at least one author has called it the ultimate resource, or it is not. If it is, wasting human capital, is indeed the ultimate folly, just to play on the words of ultimate. And it is expensive. The cost of education is expensive regardless of where one gets that education. As the reporters, the authors who will talk to us about, there is a very significant proportion, a majority of the people who have the worst outcomes that are actually educated somewhere else. So somebody else paid for their education, and that money is gone. It's also quite a bit of loss in income, and again, the authors will talk about that. Dramatic difference between using your skills and not being able to use your skills. And that's important for many, many reasons, including the fact that you're not going to do as well for you and your family. You're not going to buy so many things. Therefore, the local economy doesn't get whatever bump they could get because people buy, and whether you buy or you have an apartment when you're making whatever it is, $40,000 or $90,000, a big difference, if you will. And of course, lost taxes, the revenue issue, which is also a unique way of looking at this issue. And as I said earlier, everyone is struggling with the same issues. Highly selective systems such as Australia and Canada, but also others, have now modified dramatically their selection processes. Many of you who don't have to live in that world, I do, still think that Canada has a points-tested system. In reality, they realized that the points test was a perfect way for people to waste their talents. So 10 years after people who were points tested with education and graduate education, et cetera, they were still struggling to find a footing in the economy. So they have moved from that to something that's much more complicated, that does, however, something that we do particularly well, which is having employers and provinces working through employers choose the immigrants. So somebody with an education goes directly to a job. This is our H-1B system, and several other RO system, et cetera. Very important thing. And Europe, of course, who loves to create regulations and rules and laws and all that, Brussels has created a very complex and very, fully articulated system whereby people are required, governments, member states are required to sort of incorporate all that into. And Germany, for instance, has done so since 2013. And they're having a massive problem with recognizing credentials and qualifications. And now, of course, with all of these people who have been coming through the refugee system, the asylum system, I should say, give you a datum, only 13% of people who have come to Germany since 2013 are actually in the labor force. So an awful lot of these things are happening everywhere, and in Southeast Asia, in Asia more generally. And this is important for us to keep in mind. By sometime in January, we will be releasing 5 papers, massive papers, but nonetheless papers rather than books, that are looking at these very issues in the context of the ASEAN Economic Community. It used to be the ASEAN nations, a group of 10 Southeast Asian countries. They've organized themselves into an economic community as of January of this year or December of last year. And we have focused as the intellectual partners of both the Asian Development Bank and the ASEAN on how to actually try to break this particularly difficult issue, which is get people who have qualifications and credentials to work at roughly the level at which they should be working. So the order here will be Michael will speak first, followed by Jeanne. They're the authors, 2 of the 3 authors of the report. And then, in the order in which their names appear, we're going to have Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, who is a senior policy analyst with National Steels Coalition, followed by Wendy Jeanne, strategy senior manager for Accenture, and of course, Steve Tobocman, a friend of the Institute for a long time, who is the director of Global Detroit and Leadership Team, We Global Network. So I spent too much time. They're going to yell at me, but Michael, it's yours.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you all for coming, and thank those of you joining us electronically for joining us. For this, and some of you know, quite long-awaited release of this work on this report on brain waste among high-skilled immigrants in the United States. I think, as Dimitri made pretty clear, this issue of the failure of societies to make full use of the talents and skills to waste this kind of capital it's been one of the organizing focuses of MPI. Both as you could tell, both our domestic work and our international work. It's a focus that also spans our work on immigration policy and our work on immigrant integration policy, which is led by our National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. We think, and as you'll see in the report, that this issue is of particular concern, should be of particular concern to policymakers right now in the United States. Our research that we report here shows that an unrecognized fact, one that kind of took us by surprise, that almost half of recently arrived immigrants to the United States in recent years have a college degree or more. This is up from about 33% before the recession and up from about a quarter back in 1990. So what this suggests to us, again, to skip to the chase that we're going to come back to, is that policymakers here need to expand their focus beyond just human capital development, going to college, graduation, to human capital utilization. That's one of our themes for the day. And again, to skip to the chase, what we find here, the kind of the home run ball demographic number, is that there are almost 2 million underutilized immigrants in the US. They represent about 1 in 4 foreign-born college graduates. So demographically, this is a big deal. And for us, what we say is it represents the worst of all policy worlds. That is to say, brain drain in the sending country and brain waste in the receiving country. But as we're going to hear from this excellent panel, it's one policy problem that we think lends itself to solutions that have a high return on investment. All right, so who was involved in this what turned out to be the Manhattan Project of our work here at MPI? It has been a large, complex endeavor, and just to prove it, I'm going to mention some of our patient and very engaged supporters and funders. First, our collaborators and funders from the New American Economy: Angie Mark, Kate Brick, an MPI alumni, and Pavel Drumsky. From the World Education Services that supported this work and helped guide it, Paul Feltman and Stacy Simon from Imprint. And we've had the support here, the financial support of the J.M. Kaplan Fund, represented by Suzette Brooks Masters, to whom we are greatly, greatly indebted. The core analysis was done by Jim Bachmeyer. Jim's a professor of sociology at Temple University. The tax analysis was done by Carl Davis, the research director of the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy. Let me just say about the Institute for Taxation and Economic Policy that not only did they do the tax analysis rapidly, correctly, they did it for free. So we're really particularly grateful to them. And here at MPI, Jeanne and I worked on the report, but also we worked with Ariel Ruiz, who is an author, as you'll see, of the 7 state reports. And of course, we worked alongside our indefatigable communications director, Michelle Middlestad. All right, let's get to what we actually did. First, we estimated the number of immigrants, underemployed immigrants, underutilized immigrants in the U.S. and for 7 study states. And now let me do all the definitional work I'm going to do for you, which is to say that when we talk about underutilization, when we talk about brain waste, what we're talking about is immigrants who are here with at least 4 years of college, with a BA degree, a college graduate, who are either unemployed or working in unskilled jobs as classified by our Department of Labor. So that's what we did first. Second, what we did was we pooled the 2009 to 2013 American Community Survey to do really detailed demographic profiles of three distinct populations for the country and for these states. We looked at foreign-born with foreign college degrees. We looked at foreign-born with U.S. college degrees. These are two populations that are often conflated in the literature and very important to pull apart. And then finally, what we looked at, and importantly for comparative reasons, we looked at U.S.-born with U.S. college degrees. So we think that our report doesn't just add to our understanding of immigrant underemployment, but also underemployment among U.S.-born college graduates. As a parent of a 26-year-old son, this is a pressing issue in my family. So we also took advantage of a sophisticated methodology that was developed by demographers at Penn State, at Temple, and at MPI that makes it possible to, there's a little dull, assign legal status in the ACS and to break the population down by legal status. So what we have here is first ever estimates of the shares of the unauthorized, of temporary immigrants, of legal permanent residents, and of naturalized citizens who are underutilized. And a point I want to make here early and I want to make here often is that the vast majority of underutilized immigrants in the United States are in the U.S. legally and in the U.S. permanently. Third, what we did was we, way beyond my comprehension, we threw all these variables into that great social science blender that's called regression analysis. And what we did that to identify the factors that are the most important in analysis to produce some expected and some less expected results. And fourth, as Dimitri suggested, we think we took another pathfinding departure here. Using decomposition techniques, we quantified for the US and for these 7 study states the foregone earnings that immigrants working in low-skilled jobs would have earned if they'd earned wages that were similar immigrants earn in middle or high-skilled jobs. So we compared immigrants working in low-skilled jobs and immigrants working in middle and high-skilled jobs, not natives. So this makes this a much more defensible kind of comparison. And Jeanne, thank the Lord, will go into more detail here. And finally, we used these estimates of foregone earnings to calculate the federal, state, and local taxes that would have been paid if those earnings had been earned. Okay. Let me talk a little bit now about, that's what we did. Let me talk a little bit about some of our results and talk a little bit about what we found about the factors that are contributing to brain waste. We looked at some of the ones we examine in the report as place of education, English language proficiency, legal status, race and ethnicity, time in the US, degree level, and degree field. That's the roadmap of what we looked at in terms of contributing factors. And what do we find? First, in terms of place of education, I've rather given this away, but foreign educated are much more likely to be underutilized than US educated immigrants, 29 to 21%. In fact, US educated immigrants do almost as well by and large as natives, which by my eyes could be interpreted as an integration success story. About half, a little over half, by the way, of college-educated immigrants in the United States are foreign-educated. Second, not surprisingly, everybody would guess this here, English language skills are critical. They're the strongest predictor of underemployment. Immigrants who speak English, quote, not well, not at all, according to the census, are 5 times more likely to be underemployed, net of other factors, than college graduates speaking English. With regard to legal status, we see 2 stories here. One is that being unauthorized makes a big difference. 40% of unauthorized immigrants with a college degree or more were underemployed. The corollary of this, of course, which is that 60% of college-educated undocumented immigrants were working in middle or high-skilled jobs, something which is completely under-recognized in this debate that we're having over the unauthorized. But here I want to point out quite quickly that the numbers here are relatively small. The unauthorized make up only 11% of all immigrant college graduates in the United States. We found, again, staying with legal status, we found that being a citizen, net of other factors, again, holding human capital constant, is highly correlated with lower levels of underutilization. If you take a legal permanent resident with one set of human capital characteristics and you look at a citizen with the same level of human capital characteristics, underutilization, the citizen does better. So this, I think, adds a new piece of evidence to this kind of ongoing academic debate that we've had over several years over the economic value of citizenship in the United States. And here the numbers are not small. Almost 60% of college-educated immigrants are citizens. Race and ethnicity are powerful in sometimes unanticipated ways. Underemployment is highest among Latin Americans, that is to say, immigrants from Mexico, the Caribbean, and South America. Africans, as well as some Asian countries, also have high levels of underemployment. The most notable Asian country when it comes to this is the Philippines, which, as many of you know, has had a well-developed program to train and place their nationals in overseas positions. Here, a point that Amanda raised in our little green room chat, underemployment rates we found were especially high and persistent among blacks, even when we control for human capital characteristics. This is a finding that is entirely consistent with the report that I was lucky enough to be part of, a report on the integration of immigrants in American society that was released by the National Academy of Sciences a year ago. We found that time in the US had only modest impacts, somewhat surprisingly, had only modest impacts on reducing underemployment among men. It had a much bigger impact on women. We don't know exactly why. We think it may owe to cultural adaptation. It may owe to the unavailability of childcare in the United States. It may owe to visa requirements that restrict the entry of spouses into the labor market. Level of education was a big deal. Foreign educated with masters, PhDs, and professional degrees were far less likely to be underemployed than immigrants with BAs, and 60% of college educated had only a BA. And then finally, at least finally for me, as you can see, field of study made a big difference. Engineering, STEM degrees are rewarded, but parents tell your children education, business degrees, and humanities degrees are generally not. So now I will turn the floor over to Jeanne, who will talk about the interesting results.
This presentation. I'm really delighted to share the results of our challenging but exciting project. So what are our key findings from the states? I'm switching gears and talk about the state results now, which you can find more in the detailed state fact sheets that we have for 7 states. So we find that at the national level, a quarter of college-educated immigrants are either employed in low-skilled jobs, such as cashiers, construction laborers, parking lot attendants, the nannies, and the like, or unemployed. And that's compared to 18% of the US-born population. But in terms of the state outcomes, Florida in particular stands out with a very high proportion of immigrants who experience skill underutilization, 32%, followed by those in New York with 27%. On the other hand, we have Ohio and Michigan that not only have much lower rates of underutilization, about 20%, but also there is a very small difference between skill underutilization of immigrants and the native born population. And we find that these results fascinating. So what might account for state variations? Let's take a quick look at two outliers, Florida and Michigan. Michael mentioned that a couple of human capital characteristics matter in terms of exposure and risk of skill underutilization. So in case of Florida, and we compare the immigrants in Florida to those in the US overall, we see that they are less likely to have English proficiency, less likely to have advanced degrees, are less likely to be on temporary visas, which have temporary visa holders such as H-1Bs and the like have very low levels of skill underutilization. And also in Florida, predominantly immigrants come from the Caribbean and South America. Many of them are Hispanics and Blacks, and as a number of people mentioned here, these are characteristics that are associated with higher levels of skill underemployment. In contrast, in Michigan, we have immigrants who have higher levels of English proficiency, and even though they have more of them have foreign education, they have higher levels of advanced degrees, which matters quite a big deal. And most of them, really high numbers, come from Asia and Europe. Again, characteristics associated with lower levels of underemployment. So while, of course, there are differences in the economic opportunities and barriers across states, what this slide demonstrates, and the fact sheets that will go into greater detail, what they point out to is that the composition of the immigrant population matters for the types of outcomes and how well they fare in the labor market after they arrive. So now to our new and most complicated part of the analysis, and that is foregone earnings and foregone taxes that stem from immigrant skill underemployment. I will spare you from all tedious methodological details, which you'll find in the full report. But basically what we did, we looked at 4 groups of immigrants: foreign educated men and women, and US educated men and women. And we compared, within each group, we compared the earnings of those who are adequately employed, that is in high and middle skill jobs, and the earnings of those in low skill jobs. So let's take example of one group, the foreign educated men, and what we see here is that the gap in earnings between the adequately employed and underemployed is quite significant, 56,000. Well, the question is, what explains this gap? So is it due to the differences in the human capital characteristics that these immigrants have, or is it due to the low-skilled employment itself? So in other words, do I earn less because I have a bachelor degree and you have a master's degree, or is it because I work as a janitor and you work as a doctor? Again, I'll skip the equations that are behind a method that the economists and sociologists and others use called the wage decomposition method. But what it allows us to do, it allows us to separate and estimate the source and amount that is due to different characteristics. So here are our findings in that there is a $24,000 premium that the adequately employed have because of their high levels of human capital. So we are talking about stronger English skills, they're more likely to be citizens, they have higher levels of educational attainment. But an even larger proportion, 33,000, cannot be explained by the difference in workers' characteristics. In other words, 33,000, those in low-skill jobs earn 33,000 less per year, even when the two groups have similar characteristics, and that is due to low-skilled employment. So this is, again, just the foreign educated men. For 33,000 is for an average per person. If we aggregate this amount across all foreign educated men in low-skilled jobs, we find that their foregone earnings amount to 15.9 billion. We replicated the same calculations across the other three groups, the foreign educated women and the US educated immigrant men and women, and all together we added the results, and all together we found that the total amount of foregone earnings per year for all immigrants employed in low-skilled jobs amounts to $39 billion. Just to put this number in perspective, all immigrant-led households in the state of Virginia earned 36.5 billion in income in 2014, so quite a substantial amount. And if we take one American Fortune 500 company, DuPont, it had approximately 40 billion in revenues in 2013. So our number of lost earnings due to low-skilled employment of immigrants is quite substantial. How do states do? The amounts were the highest in California, 9.4 billion, followed by New York and Florida, and were the lowest in Michigan and Ohio, with about $500 million. So our next question was, how much less do immigrants in low-skilled jobs pay in federal, state, and local taxes as a result of their low earnings? And the findings, as you could see, are also quite substantial. Altogether, more than $10 billion are lost in taxes. And we were able to split this amount. At the federal level is 7.2 billion, and at the state and local is 3 billion. Again, states, California and New York, have more to gain if the immigrants are employed in high-skilled jobs, and smaller states have naturally less to gain. So these results show that there is significant economic penalty that immigrant underemployment imposes, both in terms of foregone earnings and foregone taxes. So in sum, nearly 2 million college-educated immigrants either work in low-skilled jobs or unemployed in the United States. And because Nigerian engineers drive cabs and Mexican doctors babysit someone else's kids, these immigrants and the U.S. economy more generally lose close to $40 billion in foregone earnings and underpay $10 billion in taxes. So tapping this large reservoir of talent, skills, and education would serve as a source of productivity and growth for the national and state economies and improve the outcomes for the immigrants themselves. Very quickly, our estimates are conservative, in part because we focused on employed immigrants only, so those who are out of the labor force or unemployed, we were unable to estimate their lost earnings. And also our report focuses on severely underemployed immigrants. So why is it an urgent issue? As Michael mentioned, almost half of recent immigrants have a college degree, and many of them will have a foreign educated. So again, very important to address the higher skill underutilization of foreign educated immigrants. Skill underemployment is relevant for the US-born population as well, as 7 million of US-born college graduates can find jobs that are consistent with their education. And again, it's important to stress that more work needs to be done to understand the dynamics and to develop solutions that allow all high-skilled immigrants, regardless of their place of birth or education, to reach their full potential. As Dimitri mentioned, there is a lot to learn from the collective global knowledge on how to tackle brain waste, and in the United States too. In recent years, state and local governments across the country um, have taken important steps to remove the barriers, and we'll hear more about them from our panel. Very briefly, for those who will listen to us, you can find the national report and the report in brief, as well as the infographic and the state fact sheets on our website. And for those who are here, you already have them on your chairs. And thank you again very much in your interest in our work and in this topic. And off to you, Dimitri.
Thank you, John. And Amanda will go next, and you have everyone's bio sketch on your chair. So, these are people who have done quite a bit of work on this issue, have committed, a big part of their professional lives on this. So you will know in a minute why, Amanda.
I want to say thank you, first of all, to MPI for inviting me to join part of this discussion. I think this is an extraordinarily exciting moment and one that really can be galvanizing. I want to start with a story. So almost 10 years ago, I was sitting in a small office in Philadelphia, and a report came across my desk called Uneven Progress. And I went down the hall to my executive director at the small nonprofit where I worked, and I said, "This is your story." She was an Irish immigrant who came to the US with a degree in physical therapy, and it took her 3 years of dogged detective work and tracking down information to figure out how to become relicensed in the US. And she spoke English, and she had a US-born husband who could work and support the family while she was doing that. And it was that history of her own experience that had caused her, after she retired from her physical therapy career, to start the nonprofit where I was working, which was the Welcoming Center for New Pennsylvanians. And I take you back to that moment because it was incredibly powerful for the field almost 10 years ago when MPI really put a spotlight on this issue. And I think all the more so now, because 10 years ago, we didn't have the range of state-level offices of immigrant affairs, mayor's offices of immigrant affairs that we have today. We didn't have the field that we have today around immigrant integration. And as you'll hear from Steve a little bit later, we didn't have groups like We Global Network. So the world has changed a lot in 10 years, but there are things that haven't changed. And that's part of why I sit where I currently sit. So I'm with the National Skills Coalition. We're a national, nonpartisan, nonprofit coalition of workforce, adult education, and immigrant who are supporting opportunities for every worker in every industry to build skills through education and training and be able to earn credentials and family-sustaining wages. And I think a couple of the things that I really jumped out at me about Michael and Jeanne's findings, which I imagine you deduced this from hearing their presentations, but I just want to explicitly say the work of this report was not just in conducting the analysis, but in developing the methodology and all of the cognitive heavy lifting in designing what questions the study would even be able to answer and how. And that's an enormous amount of invisible labor. So I just wanted to make it less invisible for a moment there. So what did I learn from this report? Well, we've already heard, but I think it cannot be overemphasized, the enormous importance of English. And not just survival English that you can learn in a terrific, lovely, community-based class with people at all different skill levels, but really professional and technical English, that will allow you to work at your appropriate skill level. So that's really critical, and I'm going to come back to that. We also saw, I was very struck by the gender differences in time in the US. Drawing on my practitioner experiences, one of the hypotheses I can come up with to explain that is it is not uncommon in my experience for women who have immigrated to the US to be pretty flexible about going to a plan B or a plan C if their plan A doesn't work out. Well, I thought this was going to work. I'm going to pivot and do that. So I thought I was going to retrain as a physician. It turns out I'm 58 years old, and it's pretty tough to compete against 25-year-old folks for a medical residency slot. I'm going to pivot and become an entrepreneur and run my own business, or I'm going to pivot and become a community health worker and do public health administration or all kinds of work, right? So I suspect that a piece of what may be going on in those gender differences in time in the US may be some of that sort of going to plan B or plan C. And that has implications as we think about immigrants as assets to help solve local labor market needs, right? Because our labor market is changing rapidly, and that has important implications for economic developers as well as workforce developers, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then I would be remiss as a Philadelphian if I did not acknowledge and go back to the point that Michael was discussing, which is the continuing salience and importance of race in opportunity and frankly in preventing opportunity for immigrants and for US-born community members. And I think that is both incredibly frustrating for those of us who have worked on these issues for a long time and have encountered people whose lives have been stymied by barriers, but also I think also galvanizing, because there are interventions that can be carried out and that can be effective, and I think we should definitely be intentional about recognizing, as Jeanne was saying, that the composition of immigrant populations in different cities and states is different. In my home city of Philadelphia, the largest proportion of immigrants come from Asia. African immigrants make up twice the percentage that they do in the national population, so it's 1 out of every 10 in Philadelphia. So what can we do now? What can you do when you leave this room, those of you who are practitioners or those of you who are researchers and policy advocates? We're fortunate. We have a piece of federal legislation that Congress reauthorized a couple of years ago with overwhelming bipartisan support, and that's the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It is not conceived of as an immigrant human capital solution, but it can be used that way. WIOA provides both job training and workforce services, but also adult education. And for the first time in this reauthorization, Congress explicitly named immigrants with degrees and credentials from abroad as an eligible population for adult education services. That's great that it's named, but now it has to be made real at the state and local level. I want to be cognizant of my time here because I know we have other folks to get to. Yes. So let me get to 2 quick other points before I close my section here. Work-based learning and midternships. So we hear a lot now about apprenticeships and opportunities for people to earn while they learn. I want to invite you to consider that as an opportunity for mid-career internship for immigrants to allow employers to get a sense of immigrant skills and capacities in a low-pressure way before offering them full-time employment. And then I want to return to this question of alternative careers and pathways. We hear a lot about career pathways and the need to be able to have multiple entry and exit points for earning credentials. And again, if we're thinking of immigrants as needing to sometimes go to a plan B or plan C for other middle or high skill careers that they can move into, even if they're not going to re-credential in their exact original profession, I think that's very important to think about. So let me stop there because I know we have other presenters to get to, and I know we'll also have questions from you all.
Amanda, you've been so disciplined, I'm shocked. But she's demonstrating something that I hope the rest of our speakers. So, Wendy.
Thank you so much. So first of all, it's really a pleasure and honor to be speaking on this panel. My name is Wendy Jeanne. I'm a senior manager with Accenture. And I wanted to begin my remark by congratulating MPI for releasing such a powerful and really critically needed information for the field, right? Because I do think that by putting a size and kind of helping the society understand the scale of the issue and putting a cost to the society for this brain waste phenomenon, then we can now move into an informed discussion with the society about what can we do together, right? What is the investment that we need to put in order to kind of overcome this brain waste issue? This problem is also very personal to me. So I am actually one of the skilled immigrants that the report cover. I was born and raised in China. I came to the US when I was 12, barely speaking any English. And so I grew up in a blue-collar immigrant community where I was surrounded by people who were essentially the topic of the study. And so one of the best examples is my best friend's father, who was an engineer in China. And he came to the US, not being able to get back to his field because of a language barrier, because of other issues, that he ended up as a janitor and working and pretty much finished his career as a janitor with the California government. So it's a really noble career. He's able to provide for his family. However, just imagine how much better our society can be if we're able to put him into the field that he was trained for. Professionally, I am a consultant working with our nonprofit practice at Accenture. For the last 2-3 years, I've been working closely with our corporate citizenship program in partnership with Upwardly Global. And so, for those of you who are not familiar with Accenture's corporate citizenship program, we have a Skills to Succeed initiative, which is a workforce-focused initiative that aims to train 3 million people worldwide to gain the skills they need in order to either build a business or find a job. And Upwardly Global, which is one of the few organizations in the US, if not the only one, that focuses exclusively on skilled immigrants. And we partner with Upwardly Global. They are a really critical partner of ours, an important part of our portfolio. And so we have been having a great relationship with Upwardly Global through our work. I wanted to talk a little bit I wanted to focus on my remarks primarily in 2 areas. The first one is around why does Accenture in this space? What is the business case for us, right? And then the second one, I want to talk a little bit about what's our relationship with Upwardly Global? What has been our experience with our work in this space, and what kind of advice that we can give to the field around public-private partnership building. So a little bit about Accenture, and many of you probably do know that Accenture is a global technology professional services company. We operate in 120 countries, hire over 384,000 people worldwide, and we are a global firm with a focus. Our mission is to bring innovation to change the way that the world lives and works. Because of our global presence, because we work at the front end of the technology, we need to have a workforce that is innovative, that is global-minded, that can relate to our clients, that represents the diverse portfolio of our client base. And so because of that, diversity and inclusion is a critical component of our business strategy, right? We need to have access to a highly skilled workforce, individuals who can bring to our clients the best technology, the best innovative thinking, a wide diverse perspective, so that they can connect with our clients, understand their challenges, and therefore help them resolve their challenges and help them excel in the business world. So we see that the skilled immigrants to be a critical part an important part of our diversity and inclusion portfolio. It is a great way for us to expand our talent pipeline, and we work that in partnership with Upwardly Global. Upwardly Global is able to provide us with access to a good pool of candidates that are talented, they are skilled, and oftentimes extremely grateful for the opportunity they're presented. And so they are some of the extremely loyal individuals at our company. Currently, we have around 13 individuals working at Accenture through our partnership with Upwardly Global. And as a result, and these are highly talented individuals that are integrated into our work environment extremely well, progressing in their careers. And one of a kind of neat story that I want to tell is this Iraqi refugee that we hired last year through our partnership with Upwardly Global. She came to the U.S. through a immigrant through a visa called SIV, so Special Immigrant Visa, and she was working alongside our troops in Iraq, managing multi-million-dollar contracts, right? But after she came here in the U.S., she really had a hard time finding a job. Through Upwardly Global, through our employee engagement effort, we're able to bring her into our first, to see our recruiting for our first interview. And she was so good that she's able to, our recruiters actually help organize the second interview before the first interview was over. So, so that kind of demonstrates the value of these talented individuals that we have in this country, and that the benefit to our business. So, what has our experience been with Upwardly Global and our partnership in this space, right? So our relationship with Upwardly Global actually has last for 5 years now. It's a really beautiful story, right? We begin with just 6 individuals out of our Chicago office giving their time back to the organization, and 5 years later, we truly have established a multifaceted, relationship that benefits both parties. We have given Upwardly Global over 6,000 volunteering hours through our employee engagement effort. We have given them over $1 million of cash grant, as well as over $1 million worth of pro bono support for this organization. And it's, just last week, we wrapped up an extremely successful refugee employment career summit day, where we have a webcast with our employees to kind of engage our recruiters to understand some of the unique challenges that this population is facing. So our effort with Upwardly Global has been incredibly important and successful. And it's also really, so the reason why that the relationship has been successful, and that, some of the key secret sauce that I would categorize into 3 areas. First one is a really great fit. Second one, it's a relationship that both parties bring something to the table, right? And then finally, there's a lot of leadership engagement and internal champion at Accenture that we're able to bring to make sure that relationship is sustainable. So let me go through each one of those 3. In terms of good fit, I would encourage, for those of the nonprofits who are listening through webcasts or in this room, to think about how does your mission fit with the organization that you would like to partner. In this case, our Skill to Succeed goal of helping underrepresented or underprivileged population finding jobs and building their skills fits extremely well with the Upwardly Global's mission and vision. And on top of that, because we're such a diverse company, a lot of employees are first generation or second generation immigrants. So when they meet the job seekers, they really get it. They see their own image or the image of the parents in front of the job seekers that they're helping, right? So because of that, we're finding that there's a lot of employee resonance with our employees. And I cannot tell you how many times where we have Accenture people come up to me and say, I'm so proud of, my work with Accenture because of, what we're doing with Upwardly Global. Secondly, it's a mutually beneficial relationship because we all bring something to the table. And as I mentioned earlier, Upwardly Global help us with accessing to a talent pool, but also really kind of position us for a lot of important initiatives, such as refugee engagement, such as immigrant hiring. And so finally, there's a strong leadership buy-in within Accenture, and we're able to devote a dedicated team to really manage this relationship, making sure that this relationship is growing and benefiting everyone internally. So with that, I'm gonna end my remarks here and prepare for any kind of Q&A.
Thank you. Everybody's so well behaved. I don't know what's going on. Did you take any pills earlier today or what? Steve, and could you say something about Upward Global, because some in our audience may not know of the organization. You certainly do.
Well, so Upperly Global is a nonprofit. It works across the United States with, I think, offices in 4 or 5 cities now. Detroit was one of those cities. We were the 4th city. And it works with college-educated immigrants and refugees who have at least moderate English skills, a 4-year college degree, and have legal presence and can work, are work authorized. And it helps them with everything from the soft job skills, resume writing, interviewing skills, job search skills, to getting their professional licenses, and works with them so that they are prepared to interview and be placed with employers across the country. And so Accenture not only works here on the East Coast, but frankly in the Detroit office, they have been a place where we do mock interviews with Accenture HR people to help improve the interview skills of the immigrants and refugees we serve. Global Detroit is, well, I want to thank, first of all, the Migration Policy Institute, the New American Economy, Imprint, and all the others that put this study together. It is enormously valuable to us out in the field who can now talk to foundations, local government, and economic development organizations, chambers of commerce, and employers about the opportunity that we can tackle in resolving brain waste and working towards full engagement of our human capital resources. Global Detroit's an economic development organization. We say we focused on mobilizing Detroit's immigrant potential. We started in 2009 at the height of this country's economic crisis. So if you're not familiar with what Michigan went through in the 2000s, we lost literally 1 million private sector jobs, about 1 out of every 5 private sector jobs. We went from the 17th wealthiest state in per capita income to the 42nd in 10 years. So we had unemployment at twice the national average. Which is really interesting when you look at this study that starts at the height of this crisis. So in 2009, the Chamber of Commerce, the philanthropic community came together and said, we need to get some solutions to this economy. And immigration might be one of those solutions. Pretty forward-thinking stuff. We looked around the country, and there was very little going on in the middle part of the country. And I'm really appreciative to have Global Detroit and the Welcoming Economies Global Network, We Global Network, on this panel to talk about how this plays out outside of the Beltway and outside of the coast. Because that is an increasingly more important destination point for immigrants in the United States. So we looked at opportunities, and brain waste is one of the many opportunities, I would say untapped opportunities, that local economies can leverage to grow their economies, create jobs throughout the economy, and create more robust growth. Since we launched in 2010, just in Ohio alone, Welcome Dayton, Global Cleveland, Welcome Toledo, Lucas County, and a similar initiative in Cincinnati have all launched just in the last 5 years. And there's another 10 places across the Midwest or Rust Belt, the older industrial parts of the country. So what I think is interesting in terms of reading the study is the unique impact in those 2 Ohio and Michigan states that are in the middle part of the country. What you see is these are 2 states, as you see the brain waste for the American-born population, U.S.-born population. You see that, like Florida, it's at the high part. And when you talk about the mortgage foreclosure crisis, we call it the hardest hit states. We were the hardest hit by the economic crisis. And so, as I said, we had unemployment at twice the national average, yet skilled immigrants saw some of the lowest brain waste levels of the 7 states in Michigan and Ohio. That's an amazing statistic. There are a lot of factors for that. One that I'll touch on that you mentioned is we tend to get a lot of skilled college-educated immigrants as H-1B and temporary workers in the auto industry, corporate-driven. In fact, 3 of the top 10 metro areas in the country for the density of H-1B workers, so the number of H-1B workers divided by the total labor force, are Detroit and Ann Arbor. We also tend to attract those with a STEM education to work in the automotive design industry, the manufacturing industry, in our biosciences. We have great research universities. There's a whole nother topic that MPI has been a lead on, and that I know Dimitri has, about maybe how federal immigration law can be more state-driven or provincial-driven as in Canada, and I think some of the results in this study underscore that fact. But I was really asked to speak about the policies and programs locally that are called forth by the realizations in this study. And so what can local communities do? And a lot of the playbook that we've been implementing in Michigan is also underscored in the Imprint study, Steps to Success. And so that study also looked at how do college-educated immigrants succeed over time. And the first one of that is English, and that's the one that you identified as being 5 times, that if you speak English well compared to those who are limited English proficient, you're 5 times as likely to get placement in your skill and labor. So what we've done, and it's been a long time coming, is just Monday, the Michigan Office for New Americans, Governor Snyder, again a Republican governor, announced new English ESL grants to 5 different organizations, $50,000 apiece, $250,000 in English language accumulation. And we're going to see more of those grants hopefully in 2017. This was the first foray into that. And that $250,000 comes from the governor's personal budget, not from a department line item. And it really underscores the importance that we're seeing and the opportunity we're seeing in Michigan. I would argue that, I think Amanda touched on this, which is that vocational English and higher level English classes is a critical need, and one that we're not really great on. The other thing I want to touch on in terms of English language accumulation is that in a post-Trump world, this is a real opportunity for us. That even those who decided that immigration and cracking down on the undocumented was an important issue for a national election, they tend to favor seeing more English accumulation among the immigrants that are here lawfully. And so I think that we're going to be fighting a lot of defensive battles, but we can make great progress in getting more resources to help new Americans get the English skills that they need that show that they're 5 times as likely to get into the skilled professions that they want. A second area, and this is not necessarily an area of policy, but a program, is building professional networks. We have partnered with Upwardly Global and its successor here in Michigan, the Michigan International Talent Solutions, that I'll talk about later, through what we call our Cultural Ambassadors Program. This program is modeled on the Halifax Connectors Program in Canada, and it's also working in St. Louis where they call it their Ambassadors Program. So we've identified 160 professional volunteers, some of which are foreign-born, some of which are U.S.-born residents, who want to give back and want to help new skilled professionals in our region. We've had 50 one-on-one matches, and we simply say, go to lunch with this person and open your Rolodex to 3 contacts. This person this new immigrant may be looking to get from a menial labor job into a skilled profession, or they may be a new skilled professional. But building those networks we know are critical to long-term success for skilled immigrants. A third area is the work that Upwardly Global and its successor, we call the Michigan International Talent Solutions, MITS, is so we started, Global Detroit helped recruit Upwardly Global to the state. We started with a small grant to map out 11 licensing pathways for common professions, from accountant to lawyer to doctor to nurse. And Upwardly Global has done this, I think, in 5 or 6 other states. And so we started with 11 licensing guides. And then we were able, the state funded the creation of an Upwardly Global office in Detroit. And in that first year, we placed 26 college-educated immigrants and refugees into jobs that tapped into their skills and education. The average job placement saw a $42,000, almost exactly your $46,000 brain raise, $42,000 increase in salary in that first year alone. So the state of Michigan was thrilled with that. They've expanded their investment. They stole the person, Annie Fenton, from Upwardly Global, brought her in-house to the Michigan Office of New Americans, and then her first fiscal year, September to October of the last year, we've placed now 33 additional people, and even saw a $43,000 increase for those 33 people. This is a program funded with about $200,000 of state money, and The governor, in March of last year, moved the entire Michigan office for New Americans, not the ESL grants, but the other stuff, into the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. And that's to protect it from political changeover, so that subject to his successor's budget or anything like that. So we're making long-term investments in these strategies. And if you look at the return of investment for one staff person, $200,000 of state money, plus our partnership with Upwardly Global, to these 33 people we've placed, collectively have seen a $1.1 million increase in wages. So we've gotten to 1/500th of our loss that you guys quantified in your study. We have 499 more steps to go, but in 1 year it's significant, and it outperforms most of the other job placement, job training, upskilling investments that the state has made. And so when you're just thinking from your own bottom line of your own growth in economy and your own tax revenue, these kinds of strategies that Upwardly Global, Imprint, and others have are really important. So I look forward to our questions.
Thank you. And about Upward Global, because some people may not know the organization. So this has been a terrific set of presentations. We'd like to engage people in a conversation now. And, we'll take your questions. Lady over there, would you please identify yourself and your organization, wait for the microphone to come to you, and please realize that this is going to be on the web and all this other kinds of stuff, so smile.
Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm a graduate student at GW. I'm doing immigration policy. This is where I'd like to work. I appreciate Amanda Bergson-Shilcock's comments about race and how that is an issue. I'd like to ask Wendy and Steve, what measures have you taken or would you like to take to mitigate that issue, keeping in mind that a lot of the immigrants that come to America and Canada, where I'm from, are people of color?
Take this.
I mean, most of the immigrants, very few of the immigrants to Michigan are Canadian or European. So we see a lot of Middle Eastern, we see a lot of Indian, we see a lot of Chinese, and as well as African immigrants in an increasing number. Everything we do at Global Detroit, and I would say I want to give some credit to the We Global Network as well, has put race front and center. I live in a city that's 85% African American, and for us to talk about strategies to grow the economy, revitalize neighborhoods that are immigrant inclusive without addressing the race issues head on are important. So as we think through opportunities, that question is really at the top of what we do. I don't know that we've gotten to the point of figuring out how to integrate those conversations on the upskilling of college degreed immigrants and how it also works. I mean, I was sort of surprised in this study to see the brain waste in the domestic population. And I think that race is I think if you looked under that, race would be underscoring all of that, or not all of it, but a significant portion of it. We do work around entrepreneurship. That's an area where our investments to do entrepreneurial supports for immigrant entrepreneurs. Our program, 85% of the 500 graduates of the program are African American, and so we seek to integrate these things and make sure that we're talking about these things front and center. But I think I wouldn't exclude us in terms of the answers of the solutions, because I know Amanda has also put in a lot of work about how we can address these issues. And as I said, I think a lot of the barriers that you see in the immigrant population, as you lower those barriers, as you get employers to think more inclusively and to think more strategically about the impact that diversity can have on their bottom line, addressing those race barriers, there's a lot of openings to bring others along, not just our immigrant populations.
Thank you. Michael?
When we finished, we said that there was two sort of research agendas that were left undone. One was to estimate the costs of underemployment, which is what we've done here. But another was to try and go deeper into this question of in effect, accounting for race and for ethnic origin in underemployment rates. So, and I think one of the there's two follow-ons here. First, to look much more, to take our data and look much more carefully at underemployment among blacks, and then Hispanics, and then Asians. One of the interesting findings is that even though Asians have comparatively low levels of underemployment, when you compare them to natives, they earn less than comparable natives. So, and that's a similar finding with the National Academy of Sciences panel. And then what should be done is what's been done in Canada, which is this kind of resume testing. Paired testing to see what's going on. I'm not sure that this is going to take place in the Trump administration, but it's something that perhaps.
Just a second.
So again, I'm a Canadian, so I know a little bit more about it, and I know where the bodies are buried. So we are often lauded for our point system and how fair it is, but when you drill down, there are race issues in the point system. And when we just recently segued to a system where businesses get to choose, get a say on who gets to come to work as a skilled immigrant, they also have their preferences, and somebody with a last name Smith might get a higher chance of getting hired than somebody with a last name, Rodriguez. So just so everybody knows, the point system is not a cure to race problems.
Thank you. Amanda, you have a comment on this?
Just briefly, structural problems need structural solutions. And I think it's important to recognize that we cannot put this on individual immigrants, and we cannot put this on individual hiring managers. This really needs to be a structural question. And I would point to two things, and thank you other people on the panel for mentioning my prior research on this, which I did with my colleagues here at World Education Services. But social capital is vitally important. I think everybody in this room probably got their job through some kind of informal connection at some point in the process, whether it was somebody who passed along your resume or somebody who gave you an informal interview, whatever that was. And by definition, when you move to a new country, you dislocate yourself from all of that place-based social capital in your home country. But one interesting thing that we did find in the Steps to Success study was that African and Caribbean immigrants in many cases had more of that social capital in the US. And that's important because that's a buffer, right? Having that professional network, having that social network is how you find out about those job opportunities that aren't posted. And getting that opportunity to get your foot in the door and prove your bona fides to an organization or an employer is how you get hired. So we need structural changes, and a lot of organizations have moved to blind resume reviews where you're not seeing the name of the applicant at certain stages. But we also need recognition that policy agendas and policy fixes to help people build their professional networks and their social capital are a potential partial solution. I'm not going to say it's a magic bullet to these issues, but I just want to emphasize again that we cannot, while this is an individual issue in terms of hiring, we cannot reduce it to a question of individual considerations, because that just obscures the structural nature of the challenge and, frankly, the solutions that we have to apply.
Thank you, Amanda. And just to remind again to our viewers, the online viewers, you can tweet questions to AT Migration Policy, or use the hashtag MPI Discuss, or email to events@migrationpolicy.org. We actually have a couple of people who have come in through the Twitter. I will try to take their questions, but the gentleman over there seems to have a question.
Hi.
Once more, identify yourself, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera.
My name is Sohail Salahuddin, and I have a varied background in business, finance, and nonprofits. And I'm also one of the people who, I was an immigrant here, and I integrated well. I studied here. So there's a couple of issues. One is, when you integrate, what happens is it does strange things to your resume, whereas people who are born here and go through the normal college system and go through jobs. They have a very neat resume on LinkedIn, but when you have to spend many years getting residency and becoming a citizen, you have to go through very strange paths. And people, I'm amazed, after few decades, are still not recognizing that as innovation and entrepreneurship. Instead, they look, because to get through those rungs, you have to really jump a lot higher and faster than people who have networks here, as Amanda mentioned. And that is not coming through in the corporate sector or even in Washington, D.C. Secondly, the other thing is that I want to say is, after having gone through these hoops, in a way, we bring a different sense of insight into American society. Like, I actually integrated in New York, and I felt I could go into African communities and Latin communities and Polish communities, whereas everybody else was still segregated. And I remember going to Detroit in the 80s, and that is the most segregated society I'd ever seen in my life, really. I have never lost that image of wires and guard dogs and segregation. What I'm trying to, I know you're going to
Do you
cut me
have a
off.
question?
I guess what I'm saying is, in a way, I'm also the subject of all these discussions and seminars and what's happened this year, but I only get 2 minutes to get input. So what I'm asking is, if anybody wants to actually include people like me in designing these interventions, in assessing what's going on, in expanding the groups, as opposed to just having 1 minute inputs, that is not working, right? We've already seen that this year. So what I'm realizing the last 2 weeks is, I think most of you are still waiting for something else to happen and still go along the same way. And that's not going to happen, right? So I'm saying, talk to me later if you like. Otherwise, we will meet each other in the next emergency.
You're making a good point, and I think, perhaps you can walk up here at the end of this and, talk with some of the panelists about this, because this is a very interesting point. I don't want to be stalling. Are you having your hand up? Yes, you are. Okay.
I wasn't
Please.
sure if you were done. My name is Jacqueline Rodriguez, and I'm with the Manhattan Strategy Group. And I guess my question to the panel would be, under this new administration, what are some of the program or policy implications that you recommend or that we should be pursuing, as many states try to respond not only to a diverse set of population, like you said, highly skilled immigrants, but also undocumented, the needs that, under WIOA need to be implemented, but also the response to maybe like working class frustration in trying to respond to more middle skills or middle skill job creation?
Thank you. Anybody who wants to answer that, it has to be a very short answer, because that's not what it is that we're discussing today. But I think that the young lady deserves a comment. Amanda?
So the good news is we have policy interventions that work to help people build skills. And some of them are inherent in legislation like the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Some of them are in other federal policies. The bad news is that those interventions are often fragmented. It's hard for people to know that they exist. People often have a sense of zero sum. So if one population of job seekers is getting services, then somebody else must be losing out. And I think that's really a task for advocates, to be able to sort of better align the systems and services and funding streams that do exist, and there are a number of them, but also to be better at storytelling and to better communicate what it means for all of our communities. I thought one of the most powerful things in this report was frankly seeing that of the 39 billion or so in foregone earnings, 28 billion, if I remember correctly, was attributed to if we just brought immigrants up to parity with US born. So not even moving folks anywhere other than just parity with US born college educated folks who might be have some degree of underutilization. So, I would say alignment and storytelling.
Thank you, Amanda. The gentleman over there, once more, identify yourself, etc., etc.
I'm Dr. Ahmad Rajavi. I'm sorry that I was a bit late and I missed.
Closer with the microphone closer.
I was a bit late really to attend this seminar. When I saw that issue of doctors in taxi as a taxi drivers, I thought I might be able to contribute to your institution, which basically, the way I see it, is for gain. than really anything else, because there are companies and they want to employ the people and so and so. The reason behind my immigration to this country was my elder brother was assassinated. I'm an Iranian origin, assassinated by Iranian regime in Geneva. It is quite clear, and it is well known worldwide, that it has been the job of the Iranian regime, and nobody has questioned it so far. They call it axis of evil, but they haven't done anything about it. Short story, I have been a very successful doctor in London, in England. Because of fear of my life and because I didn't get the right protection, I asked the British that if I can carry gun for my self-protection. So that wasn't the case because the police is not really armed in England. So I ended up here. I went through the process. I already was a doctor, and I got really a fellowship in general surgery from Northern Ireland. I worked for 6-7 years in Northern Ireland during all the trouble. I got all the experience and knowledge. I came here, I went through the process of USMLE exams. I passed my USMLE exam, but then I didn't get residency. And I found out, because some people, they were saying, go and see a member of parliament. And I said, hey, what the member of parliament has to do with a doctor? It was my mistake that I didn't go and see a member of parliament here. I ended up eventually working as a surgical assistant, probably a lot of people they know here, in Doctors Community Hospital. Short story, I had to leave that and went back to England, and I started really back and forth, and I am retired now from National Health Service in England. I came back. And when I saw that, I thought, hey, I might be able to assist you, really, because those taxi drivers, they eventually, like me, if they pass their exam, if they show their ability and still cannot get anywhere, like for example, myself now, how can I help and whom I can help? Few years ago, I wrote really to some disasters areas that with my own expenses, I'm quite happy to come and help you. The
You're
only
right.
things I
If
need,
I
you
may
give me an...
interrupt you, this is really about your story, and this report is about your story, and we
Yes.
appreciate that.
Right.
But I am really trying to keep us within a time frame, and
Sure.
I have a question there and 2 questions from Twitter.
By all means. I was wondering that if there is any way I can help you. That's the
Thank you.
reason I came here.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Adam, please identify yourself and all that. And this will be the last question I'll take from the audience here because I have 2 Twitter questions.
Adam Hunter, the Pew Charitable Trust. My question goes back to the researchers, particularly Michael and Jeanne. I'm curious if you maybe internally have tinkered around with or considered whether replicating your analysis, whether you would replicate your analysis for a pre-recession time frame, say 2006. I was likewise struck by the high proportion of U.S.-born underutilized, and I'm curious if there are structural changes in the economy that you may tease out that could maybe shine a light on where some of these structural solutions may be, both for the U.S.-born as well as the foreign-born.
Good question. Who wants to take it? It's one of you 2.
Well, I just can say that our research agenda expanded, but yet another issue. It is very important because the understanding the trajectory and change and whether the share of underemployed increases over time and the cost such underemployment carries over time is critical. At the moment, it's not on the list, but it's something that we'll be definitely monitoring from now forward.
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I think it's a logical next step, sort of, to look at this, so you can think about this over time. But what was really striking was the profile of the recent immigrants. If you look at recent immigrants in the 5 years before the recession, 33% had a college degree. If you look at the recent immigrants between 2009 and 2014, have to. I mean, so there's a big change, and the question, and that would logically have an effect as well.
Asking them to open a franchise operation here that's going to work for them for the next 10 years. On their behalf, I thank you. But I have two questions through Twitter. Aliyah Yaeli asked, and this also goes to you, Michael and Jeanne, have we estimated how much money in forgone spending was, in other words, money that was not injected in the local economy as a result of the lower salaries or income?
Too complicated. We didn't do it. We just looked at direct cost, the direct cost being the loss of earnings and being the foregone taxes. Those are calculable. The indirect cost, of which consumer spending is one type, was beyond the scope of the study.
Thank you. And this is a softie for the other three of you. Althea Gonzalez from GSER, which is the
Immigrants and Refugees.
There you go. Thank you. It's a funding collaborative. Is asking what should funders be doing? So go at it. Amanda?
Okay. So again, I'm going back to structural problems need structural solutions. There are policies, and we heard from Steve about some terrific work in Michigan, but the only federal funding stream in the US that focuses at all on immigrants and refugees is refugee specific. And so there is a great need for private foundation funders to think about how they can be the sort of mortar filling in between the cracks of public funding and frankly allowing for more of the innovation that can happen at the local level. I talked before about work-based learning and apprenticeships. Those kinds of experiences for mid-career immigrants, allowing them to have mid-career internships, can be really beneficial in allowing them to make that transition into the labor force. Obviously, investing in English language and investing in vocational ESL in particular. But I also want to just go back briefly to policy advocacy. So we have a lot of mayors and some governors right now who are really thinking about their immigrant constituents and what it means to do immigrant integration well, regardless of what the national landscape looks like. And I do think there is great value in the US as being as we say, the laboratories of democracy are the states, right? That there are really interesting innovations happening at the state level. And I would put in a plug for Adam's work at Pew with regard to state level policies and seeing what states have done, because foundations are place-based and most foundations are going to fund in their own communities. So they can identify the places where they can advance policies in their communities that can help not just one immigrant, but many. And I'll give one example from Minnesota, speaking to the gentleman in the back there around doctors. Minnesota has provided funding through the state to help foreign educated physicians be able to relicense. And they did that in recognition of the need for doctors in rural communities and the need for culturally competent health care. They're the only state in the country that I'm aware of that has state level funding to support this. There's a huge opening for foundations to do further investment to drive policy change that could really affect significant numbers of people.
And Steve, and of course Wendy. I mean, Steve, and then I was going to go to Wendy. Okay, Wendy and then Steve.
Sure. So from employers' perspective, I think it would be really interesting for us to kind of have a convening with companies who are interested in this topic, who are interested in kind of looking at skilled immigrants as a key talent pipeline, right, to come together and share some lessons learned. So I think that could be an interesting opportunity for funders. The other area that I have been working quite closely with internally is really helping our recruiters to understand some of the inherent unconscious bias in the recruiting process, right? I think that this is pretty well documented that there are some inherent sort of unconscious bias towards foreign degree, towards foreign education and experiences. So having some sort of educational program that are employer targeted to help the recruiting community overall to gain a better understanding of the challenges in this field, I think would be also very interesting.
Thank you, Steve.
I would say a couple things. One is that the emergence of this economic development lens and how immigrants fit in that, or others might just call it an integration lens, that is rapidly emerging. It's a slightly different paradigm than just a rights and social services lens, which has been a traditional philanthropic avenue of support. And this new lens is not well funded. And it's also one that while some of the programs like an Upwardly Global, we can measure the specific number of people assisted and placed, I think what has worked well in the field is a comprehensive approach, so that you have a professional connector program going with a skilled partner like Upwardly Global, going with a state that is doing licensing guides and funding English, but at the same time, we're communicating within the general population about the value proposition that immigrants bring. We're doing the policy advocacy, and we're doing a lot of shoe leather with our employers, who most of whom are not aware of this population, have a lot of myths and stereotypes. And so all of that requires a lot of work and a lot of support. And the more partners and the more, I think, comprehensive and robust communities approach on these things, the more successful it will be. It's not a laser targeted solution. Just help these handful of people have foreign degrees, and everything will be solved.
Thank you very much, and thank you both, or all three of you, for putting employers where they belong, which is front and center. I will give you an example from international experience to show you how complex the issue is. I mentioned that since 2013, Germany has completely incorporated the European legislation on this. So it is the government who actually looks at credentials and certifies people to do certain jobs. And employers don't buy into it. In other words, they say, why would I trust some bureaucrat who says that this person, has a doctor's credential that is equal to a German doctor's credential? In other words, there are all sorts of things that fall into this, a bit of discrimination. We say Canada has done this. The first place in which resumes were tested, where neither the name nor a picture of the applicant was allowed on the application, was following the banlieue fires in 2005 in France, where AXA, the gigantic French insurer, basically said, why? Well, maybe there's a structural issue with the way that we just do this thing, because if there's a picture of, let's say, a lady or a man who is, from Algeria, or which is a major, the problem that France has, or a name that looks foreign, I'm not even going to interview this. In other words, the first thing that you have to do is break a pattern where people don't get an interview. And this is extremely important. The biggest challenge that we all face here is not only scaling these things up, because it's always going to be a retail business rather than a wholesale business. The question is, how can we just increase this? This way you can make a significant difference. But there are also, and this is something that we don't like to acknowledge, or there we have so many other issues to acknowledge and work hard on, is that skills degrade. In other words, we have entered for the last several years, and this is going to accelerate over the next decade, into a period of time where an awful lot of jobs will be destroyed, not only at the manufacturing level, but also at the level of people with a college education. So skill upgrading, in addition to credential recognitions and qualifications recognitions, is a challenge that this country and every other country that uses immigration as a means of both creating more brains but also more brawn will have to really confront. And the kind of work that you guys are doing up here, and the analytics that Michael and Jeanne and MPI, have been putting on the table, are going to be extremely important, more important all the time. I would like to thank our speakers for being so disciplined and so smart. my colleagues here at MPI who have produced a modest report that is anything but modest. In other words, what goes under it, as Amanda said, I think, what was required in order to produce this 30-page report, is massive numbers of hours and collaboration among different groups. And I would like to thank you who are here, who gave us your time, and people who are online. And please have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.